Listen, when Netflix publicity asks you if you'd like to watch an early sneak peek of a brand new whodunit, of course I'm going to say yes.
Is he a suspect?
No.
Is he not a suspect because he's not a suspect, or is he not a suspect because you don't believe in suspects?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. My regular viewers will know I love a good whodunit. I've made more than my fair share of videos about the Benoit Blanc whodunits, but today we're going to be talking about a new whodunit series on Netflix called The Residence. This is being produced by the Shondaland company and stars talent including, but not limited to, Uzo Aduba, Randall Park, and Giancarlo Esposito. Before I tell you more though, I do need to clarify that this video is feature coverage. It is not a review. The review embargo is not until March, but today is the feature embargo lifting, which means that I can introduce the show to inquiring minds who want to know, but I'm not giving my opinions about the usual aspects that I would normally talk about if this were a review. Don't ask me who died. Don't ask me who did it. Don't ask me to tell you what the key pieces of evidence are, whether or not I know any of those things I just listed. It doesn't make a difference because I'm not allowed to tell you.
Don't look at me. I don't know a thing.
The show's premise is as follows: 132 rooms, 157 suspects, one dead body, one wildly eccentric detective, one disastrous state dinner. The Residence is a screwball whodunit set in the upstairs, downstairs, and backstairs of the White House, among the eclectic staff of the world's most famous mansion. The premise is very loosely inspired by the book, The Residence, Inside the Private World of the White House by Kate Anderson Brower. I checked this out of my local library to read for research purposes only, and I know that I have some enthusiastic readers in my regular audience, so I do want to be very clear when I say this. I did not enjoy a single thing about this book. It was a chore to read. This book is not a whodunit. This is a compilation and retelling of the experiences of a multitude of employees that have worked as part of the Residence, spanning back several decades and multiple administrations. The book was published in 2015, so there is nothing in here past the Obama administration. The Residence series is a fictional whodunit set in the White House and involves various employees of the Residence. I will first share some tidbits from the book just so you can get a sense of what sort of information it shares, as well as how it acts as a framework for the setting of this new whodunit series. The book introduces the vast size of the White House and the multitude of positions employed. There are ushers, chefs, florists, maids, butlers, doormen, painters, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, engineers, calligraphers, and in addition to that, about 24 National Park Service staff who take care of the White House grounds. There are some jobs with more seniority than others. The chief usher is in charge of the funds allocated by Congress to run the house, including the cost of heating, lighting, air conditioning, and the staff's salaries. It's described as being a high-intensity job. The staff of the Residence are people that stay employed at the White House doing the same job regardless of different presidents and their respective first families coming and going. Now, that doesn't mean that a particular president and their spouse can't go and fire people from various positions if they decide that it's not a good match. But the default way of doing things is that those people will stay in those jobs, working in the White House. They even have the responsibility of getting presidents and their families moved in and out, and this is something they have to do very quickly. Residence workers are said to be there to alleviate the burdens of daily life for the first family. Conversely, every administration hires their own social secretary. The social secretary acts as a conduit between the first family and the residence staff, as well as between the West Wing and the East Wing. The position involves supervision of seating for state dinners and formal events at the White House, with the secretary distributing worksheets to the resident staff showing how many people are expected and what rooms will be used for that event. So these are both occupations you see among the large ensemble of named characters in the Residence Netflix series. This setting has both similarities and differences with what you frequently find among classic whodunit stories. It's very common to have whodunits set in large houses, not just houses, we're talking mansions, villas, even yachts. Where are my last of Sheila girlies? Make yourself known in the comments. But the White House is significantly larger than your usual whodunit primary locations, as is your pool of suspects. So in theory, there's a lot of options for the show's writers to choose from. Now, any whodunit needs feasible suspects and motives. Where is the conflict and friction coming from? Well, according to the book, working in the Residence is stressful for everyone. I won't rehash the many stories of people who had to work long hours on basic federal salaries and have absurd demands made from them by the president and first family. I do not want to talk about the Lyndon B. Johnson shower thing. Reading about that was enough of a chore. But the show has a fictional staff serving a fictional president and first family, so they don't need to recreate the exact stories presented in the book about real-life presidential families. Nancy Reagan was so much of a nasty, demanding bully that one of the high-level staff quit and didn't come back to work in the White House until after she was gone. Ugh. Shifting back to the show, though, let's introduce some of these characters. Uzo Aduba is the main character, Cordelia Cupp. She consults with the Metropolitan Police Department and is the main character the audience follows as she investigates the crime, looks for clues. She talks to various people in the White House to see if they are of any interest for her to be able to solve the case. One random fact you very quickly learn about her is that she's highly interested in bird watching. Randall Park plays FBI agent Edwina Park, who is assigned to assist Cordelia on the case. She's not particularly interested in him being around her while she's working, but he continues to follow her as she looks around the White House, speaks with people that may be of interest, and so on and so forth. Giancarlo Esposito plays A.B. Winter, the White House chief usher. That's the job I mentioned before in the book section of this video. It's the high-intensity job in charge of funds allocated by Congress to run the House, including the cost of heating, lighting, air conditioning, and the staff's salaries. He also has to more or less deal with an endless array of conflict management situations. Different people want different things that are sometimes the exact opposite of one another. One example of this comes in the form of the social secretary, Lily Schmacher, played by Molly Greggs. This was another high-ranking position I mentioned in the book section of this video. Every administration hires their own social secretary, whereas the chief usher is usually someone that has already been working that job before this latest administration has moved into the White House. This dynamic of the old guard that has already been there working in the White House through multiple administrations versus the new guard, the people who come into the White House attached to this new administration, is often a space where tension gets created. That was the case more than once through various examples in the book, and it's also a dynamic that exists in the show. The show also lifts a feud from the book and uses it for the fictional narrative, that being a feud between the executive chef and the executive pastry chef. The book reads, "Some of the most enduring gossip comes from staffers who cannot get along with each other. Working at the White House can sometimes create big egos and foster big personalities. Many of the staffers who get hired, especially as chefs, are highly accomplished professionals who consider themselves the best at what they do. This kind of competitive spirit can lead to professional rivalries. The most glaring recent example being the open feud between executive chef Walter Scheib and executive pastry chef Roland Mesnier. 11 years of working side by side did nothing to diminish the animosity between the two men, which they feel just as acutely now, a decade after they both left the White House. Mesnier, now 70 years old, was hired by the Carters. Scheib, 10 years his junior, was hired by the Clintons. They disliked each other so much that they often refused to discuss the dishes they were preparing. Scheib would simply hand Mesnier the weekly menus so that Mesnier could plan accompanying desserts. Now, the show puts its own spin on this particular feud. In the show, the executive chef is a woman named Marvella, played by Mary Wiseman. The executive pastry chef is named Dieter Gotthard, and he's European. In the book, they say that the executive chef, Walter Scheib, got along with the previous executive pastry chef, who was a man named Pierre Chambrine. Chambrine had been fired by the Clintons because his food was too French, and they wanted American food. Do you see what I mean when I say the book was a chore to read? When the show presents interpersonal conflicts like these, there's always a question of whether or not this will come into play in some way for the murder, or if it's just a bit of workplace gossip. I want to talk more about whodunits in general, but I will introduce some of the other characters you get to see coming into play a bit more on the Residence show. Jasmine Haney is an assistant usher, Harry Hollinger is the president's chief advisor, the president's name is Perry Morgan, and his husband Elliot Morgan is the first gentleman. The president's brother Trip Morgan also lives in the White House, Sheila Cannon is a White House butler, and Raleigh Bridgewater is the White House's head butler. The murder is discovered during a White House event that is hosting various members of the Australian government. Julian McMahon plays Stephen Roos, the Prime Minister of Australia, and I think this might be the first time I've ever seen him play a character with an Australian accent. Although he himself is Australian, every time I've seen him in a film or series, he's had an American accent. Among the Australian side of things, we also have a cameo of Kylie Minogue playing herself. I have no idea how they booked her for this. The only time I can recall seeing her do some acting was in Moulin Rouge and Kath and Kim, unless there are other acting jobs I'm probably not remembering right now because they're not as fresh in my memory as those two are. The ensemble of characters is more vast than the ones that I've mentioned, understandably so, when the show's logline outright states that there are 157 suspects. That being said, the show does narrow things down in such a way that makes sense for the format of a Netflix series. They are not trying to fully investigate all 157 suspects, but instead find a way to hone in on the more viable persons of interest. Because there's an event going on at the White House when this murder case is underway, that puts another kind of pressure and time crunch on Cordelia to solve the case. There's the question of what would happen if these guests were to leave, whether or not diplomatic immunity will be involved, and certain players within those walls will certainly not want bad press of a murder happening in the White House to blow back on this or that powerful figure. How will Cordelia cope with such an otherworldly amount of pressure while she's investigating a murder? Well, you will just have to wait and find out. Being that I'm not yet allowed to give my opinions and fully review what it is that I've seen of the residents thus far, I want to expand the scope of this discussion today to talk a bit more broadly about whodunits and what it is that I like to see in them. Now, whether or not the residents has fulfilled these preferences, we will have to wait to talk about in about a month from now when the review embargo lifts. Of the episodes I've seen sneak peeks of so far, it can be observed that there's this tendency to name them after other famous whodunit stories. To name a few of them in alphabetical order, we have episodes named after Dial M for Murder, Knives Out, and The Last of Sheila. Dial M for Murder is a 1954 Alfred Hitchcock film. Whether or not you would categorize it in with other whodunits may be open to interpretation among some people, but it involves a murder, there's scheming, and an effort to uncover the truth of that scheme. In a way, it overlaps a fair bit with the qualities of other whodunits, so at the very least, I have it in my letterbox list of whodunits that I've ranked. This is also one of my preferred Hitchcock films to watch. Knives Out is, of course, Rian Johnson's first Benoit Blanc whodunit. I've done a number of videos on that film as well as Glass Onion. And The Last of Sheila is a 1973 whodunit written by Norman Bates himself, Anthony Perkins, and musical theater icon Stephen Sondheim. Can you believe it? They wrote a whodunit together. Now, if you were to look through my whodunits list, you will see that I have the Benoit Blanc whodunits up high because I really like when whodunits speak truth to power. Oftentimes, you have whodunits taking place among the upper echelons of a society rife with class inequality, greed, and in general the prioritization of money over basic humanity and empathy very easily makes its way into motives, suspected or actual, during the investigation of a murder. Benoit Blanc aligns himself with whomever has had some sort of injustices done to them in the cases we've observed thus far. He's not a genius simply showing off his deduction skills. Another strong point for me in a great whodunit is to have an eccentric and varied group of characters. Some whodunits are more serious and dramatic in their tone of delivery than others, but if you're going for something a bit more fun for the audience, you might let your characters be a bit more over the top in order to foster entertaining friction and bickering among that ensemble. You think about the giant family argument in Knives Out, or any number of scenes from the movie Clue. Another key to make an especially favored whodunit is that you want a satisfying reveal of the answer to the questions you've been asking throughout the entire story. The most satisfying reveals are the ones that feel earned. You want to show things of what people are doing, clues that have been found, secrets that have been uncovered. All of those moving parts need to organically lead to the big reveal. If you just drop an ending on the audience without having properly built up to it, it's not going to feel earned. In particular, fans of the genre are more likely to take issue with that. The casual viewers, maybe they won't care as much. I don't know. I'm not one of them. If the residents can fulfill some or all of these qualities to a good or great standard, that would presumably bode well for how it would perform, get some decent word of mouth feedback among the audience to get even more people to tune in. I would be interested to know whether or not they have aims to turn this into some sort of anthology series, because oftentimes with whodunits, you'll see the main detective character return in multiple stories. I don't know if it would still be called The Residence, though, if they were to attempt something like that, because The Residence specifically applies to the White House and the institution of these employees who stay working there across multiple administrations. I don't know if it would make sense or be the most interesting option to keep the detective always in the White House. Just have Uzo Aduba's Cordelia Cupp go wherever you would like to send her if you decide you want to give her another case to solve. I wouldn't be allowed to share my opinion yet anyway because this is a feature video, not a review, but I haven't seen her character solve the case yet in the sneak peek I've watched. I don't know if it's been executed at a high standard to where I as a whodunit fan would start knocking on doors to ask to watch her solve another case. We can, however, talk more about that in March when the review embargo lifts. The Resident series will be premiering on March 20th, so let's circle back then to revisit the idea of whether or not this is best kept as a limited series or if we're going to need to demand more Cordelia Cupp.
There is no place like this place. It is bigger than you.
Do you mean the house is literally bigger than me? Because that seems obvious.